My name is Natalie LeBron. I'm a policy associate at the Institute for State and Local Governance, also known as ISLG. ISLG is a good governance think and do tank driven by the idea that data-informed approaches can measurably improve the way government and public institutions operate, equitably serve all constituents, and ultimately solve social policy problems. Thank you all for joining this webinar as part of the Fall 2023, Spring 2024 approaches to outreach, engagement, and service delivery. This CTA session is part of the Criminal Justice Investment Initiative, an initiative created and funded by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in partnership with ISLG that invest in services to communities to improve public safety and enhance fairness in the criminal legal system. The vision for CJII is for service providers to receive tools and resources that will benefit the communities they serve. Thank you all for joining our webinar, New Neighbors, Navigating Resources and Work Protections for Immigrants, facilitated by New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. I want to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, closed captioning is available in this session. The instructions to access closed captioning will be dropped through the chat. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function on Zoom. We will respond to your questions towards the end of the presentation. Lastly, the presentation deck and resources from today will be sent to you after the webinar. And with all that said, it's my pleasure to pass this over to our amazing presenter, Charlie Rutima.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you everyone for being here today. I'm really, just really happy to finally take part in this space as NYCOSH, and I know the rest of the team is really excited for this opportunity. Just to be in a room full of amazing, like as I'm seeing in the chat, amazing community organizers, coordinators, case managers. So today, we're going to be talking about resources and worker protections for new immigrant communities. I definitely have a presentation I'm going to pull up right now. And then we will get started. In case there's any issue with the presentation, please let me know. Okay. We're all good? Okay. Okay, thank you all. And as Natalie mentioned, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them on the chat. I'll do my best to answer the questions at the end. And while I'm not an expert in all the issues that I'm about to talk about, I do have a lot of experience as a community organizer myself for a very long time, and also now leading this workers' rights program at NYCOSH as a program coordinator. So yeah, let's get to it. So all right, so what are we going to be talking about today? So we're going to start off. I want to introduce you all to NYCOSH in case you all haven't heard, you all aren't familiar with who NYCOSH is. Then we're going to go into resources for new immigrants, particularly asylum seekers. We're going to go into just very briefly into like what is an asylum seeker. I know there's, given the immigration context, political context that we're in today, there's so many questions. I have many questions myself. I did the best of my ability to do some research, bring it all here, but I'm going to also go over what are some things that we're going to be able to go over in this presentation, and what things I won't be able to. So I'm not a lawyer, not an immigration lawyer, so I can't answer a lot of these like detailed questions about immigration statuses, work authorization, etc. So, but nonetheless, we're going to talk about some of the resources that exist in New York City for new immigrants, asylum seekers. Then we're going to go into employment resources. We're going to talk about workforce development in New York City, talk about the Immigrant Worker Bill of Rights, what that is, what that hopes to be in the near future. And then we're going to go into talking about workers' rights in general. Maybe some things that you all are familiar with, but we know that in our community, workers' rights is an essential workers' rights is an essential practice, right? Knowing about workers' rights is important for for communities. It's another tool that they get to take in the workplace, knowledge of like what their workers' rights are. So that's always how I see it. And I think it's important for us to be familiar with it ourselves as advocates and pass that knowledge on to the community. And then we're going to end talking about new protections under DALE. For folks who aren't familiar with DALE, we're going to go over what that is at the end. Then we're going to leave some space for Q&A, and we have a feedback survey. So please don't leave early. All right. So who are we? NYCOSH, the New York Committee for Occupational Safety and Health. It's a nonprofit membership organization of workers, unions, community-based organizations, workers' rights activists, and health and safety professionals. We were founded in 1979 on the principle that workplace injuries, illnesses, and deaths are preventable. NYCOSH works to extend, defend every person's right to a safe and healthy workplace. We use training, education, advocacy to improve health and safety conditions in our workplace communities and environment. So what do we do? So some of the things that we do is advocacy. We advocate for various legislation to support safe and healthy jobs for New Yorkers all around the city, for both union workers, union industries and non-union industries, immigrant workers. So we work closely with different industries, with different stakeholders, different advocates around the city, and trying to pass legislation to better improve situation of workers. We also have a construction safety school at our organization. At construction safety school, we offer OSHA courses as well as a 10-hour site safety training, which I'll go into as well in the presentation, what that is in case you all aren't familiar. We also have the New York Healthy Nail Salon School housed at NYCOSH. Currently, what the school does, what we do in the school is we offer nail salon safety certifications, hands-on training, safety and health trainings, state test reviews, outreach, nail specialty registration, and licensing support for nail salon workers in New York City. Industrial hygiene services. So industrial hygiene, not sure who is familiar with what industrial hygiene is. I definitely wasn't familiar before I came to NYCOSH what industrial hygiene meant. But basically, it's the technical assistance and site assessments and reports on various issues in the workplace, including ventilation, indoor air qualities. We currently have an industrial hygienist on staff at NYCOSH. So she's a person that, one would call in case you're having some sort of issue in the workplace, if you're having air quality issues or are curious about air quality in your workplace or ergonomic issues, and you want to find ways to improve, your situation as well as the situation of your coworkers in your entire workplace. Industrial hygienist is usually the person one would call to come and offer suggestions. And yeah, so those services are available here at NYCOSH. We also do case management. So I particularly do the case management piece at NYCOSH as well. Within case management, there's wage theft services. We do also reports on safety and health violations in the workplace. We also do know your rights trainings for workers all around the city, particularly immigrant low-wage workers. What else do we have? We have the Assistance for 9/11 Responders and Workers, so also known as the World Trade Center Health Program, and the Victims Compensation Fund. So we help workers who were working during 9/11 under the Canal Street area in Manhattan. We help them access the Victims Compensation Funds for any injuries or illnesses that they may have up until today. And this program is also available for all workers, including immigrant workers, undocumented workers. And then other worker resources. So we've been doing a lot of COVID workshops throughout the past 3 years. Workers' compensation. We do workshops about workers' compensation. We also have referral services and workers' resource guides, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on as well. and reports. So yearly, we publish different reports. For example, the report you see on the right side of the screen there, it's a deadly skyline report. It's an annual report on construction fatalities in New York State. This report has been a big reference for legislators to pass protections for construction workers in the city. And it's a report that we do every year, publish every year in collaboration with the Central Labor Council in New York City. Okay, so before we move forward about this presentation, what will we cover and what will we not cover? So we will cover general resources for immigrant New Yorkers, knowledge of resources and support for new immigrants and asylum seekers. We will cover workers' rights that apply for all immigrant New Yorkers. What we will not cover is legal advice for immigrant New Yorkers and organizations. We won't cover political context on immigration. We won't cover specific asylum seeker protections, and we will not be covering immigration advice. Okay. Moving forward. So let's start looking at resources for new immigrants. All right. So since last spring, more than 125,000 migrants from other countries have arrived in New York, and about half of them are in our shelters, according to Mayor Eric Adams. A majority of the migrants that have arrived seeking asylum. So for those who aren't familiar with the differences between a migrant, right, an immigrant, and an asylum seeker, Amnesty International defines asylum seeker as a person who has left their country and is seeking protection from persecution and serious human rights violation in another country, but who hasn't yet been legally recognized as a refugee and is waiting to receive a decision on their asylum case. Seeking asylum is a human right. This means everyone should be allowed to enter another country to seek asylum. Currently, under U.S. law today, individuals cannot receive employment and authorization until 180 days after submitting an asylum application. So basically with this, what I wanted to cover was that for a lot of people who are in the process of asylum seeking, right, most people will not have employment authorization unless they're granted the refugee status that they're seeking. This has been one of the biggest issues. If you all are familiar with what's happening, in City Hall, you all have been in tune with like the news, like local updates. Is the fact that because so many people cannot work legally, right? We're having there's a lot of backlogs in our shelter system. There's been some efforts from the mayor and the governor to call for temporary work authorizations for asylum seekers while they wait for their statuses. Nothing has been done about it yet, though. So it's almost like a lot of people who are in this situation are in a very like limbo status, right? So it makes this like topic very delicate. We're talking particularly around asylum seekers. But nonetheless, a lot of folks are here, right? A lot of folks perhaps cannot work, but a lot of folks are perhaps working, because of this reality, people not being able to work. A lot of people have been working in the underground economy, and working within the underground economy also leaves a lot of workers vulnerable to exploitative practices from employers, and vulnerable to just like not being able or comfortable in coming forward if they have any issues in the workplace. And so this is why we've made this presentation as well, because of all these issues happening today. So for all who aren't familiar, there's something called asylum seeker resource centers throughout the city. So asylum seekers who have arrived to the city since January 1st, 2022, and can provide paperwork demonstrating that they entered the U.S. Southwest border Can also reach out to the Asylum Seeker Resource Navigation Center. Centers serve as a central location and referral network for asylum seekers to receive free and confidential assistance in navigating necessary services. So there's one 24/7 arrival center. It's the only one. It's at the Roosevelt Hotel on 45th Street. Some of the services that included there, information services include healthcare services and referrals, health insurance, enrollment, vaccination, school enrollment, mental health counseling, immigration, legal orientation, and ID NYC enrollment. This is not a walk-in center. You do need to schedule an appointment before coming in. And this is the number on the left side of the screen. As Natalie mentioned in the beginning, we're gonna be sharing this presentation with everyone right after this workshop. So you'll have access to all these slides, including the hyperlinks that are within the presentation that provide even more information. So beyond the 24/7 resource center, there are an additional 11 resource navigation centers that are now serving across the 5 boroughs. Here are some taken from New York City's website. There's currently 4 centers in Manhattan. There's a couple in Brooklyn, one in Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx. So what are some other resources for new immigrants? Currently, there's the city is offering school enrollment through the family welcome centers. There are food pantries. And again, there's these hyperlinks will be accessible to you after the presentation. Food pantries through Food Help NYC. It's a good way to, so Food Help NYC will basically find the closest food pantry to where you live or throughout the city. Free English classes for immigrants as well through We Speak NYC. Those English classes are virtual and in person, and on the website, you'll also find YouTube videos that one can play at any moment to practice English at home. You also have pro bono lawyers and free legal immigration services in New York. So there's 2 lists. One is a list of it's a pro bono lawyers network in New York State. So you'll find like organizations or attorneys that are offering like services for immigrant communities for free. And then you have also Action, also known as Access NYC now. Action NYC, formerly known as Action NYC. It's the free immigration legal services that offered by the city. Okay, so let's go into employment resources for new immigrants. Okay, so some of the organizations I've highlighted here, I put their logos here, including our own NYCOSH. So there's La Colmena in Staten Island, NICE in Queens, Workers' Justice Project, or Proyecto Justicia Laboral in Brooklyn, and Catholic Charities Community Services. So these 5 organizations are also known as worker centers in the city. And worker centers, for folks who aren't familiar, worker centers are organizations that cater to immigrant workers. They provide services, training, education, and referrals to immigrant workers in the city, regardless of the industry, regardless of your status. And some of these organizations will also hold some of the services that I highlight below, which is day labor centers. There are also free OSHA 30 SST 10 classes in Spanish. There are skill trainings workshops, worker center, also known as job centers, and we'll go over what that is. And also, all of these organizations offer workers' rights support. And again, not all of these offer the same services. So, for example, NYCOSH, we don't have a job center at our organization, but some other organizations in this network do. So going over OSHA, what is OSHA? So I want to go over what OSHA is because it's one of the essential training credentials that construction workers, which is populated very much by new immigrants today in the city, that they need. So let's go over it. So under local law 196, passed in 2019, workers in most construction sites in New York City are required to have 40 hours of training, including an OSHA 30 training. So previous to 2019, construction workers only needed to have 10 hours of training under their belt. Today, workers need to have a minimum of 40 hours of training before being able to step into a construction job site. All workers can access these trainings regardless of immigration status. And in the name of it being more accessible, there are also free courses in English and Spanish offered citywide. In Spanish, in Spanish OSHA courses, SST courses are offered at the worker centers that I previously mentioned, including our organization. So if you're interested, or if you want to refer anyone our way, any of your clients our way, to have these OSHA classes in Spanish, because we do it in-house in Spanish, please contact us. I'll be sharing our contact information at the end. Free classes in English currently are being offered at City Tech, the Academy for Occupational Health and Construction Safety. And then there are more organizations, it's maybe like a handful or less throughout the city, and the list of those organizations are in the hyperlink here as well. So what is a worker center? So folks who perhaps aren't familiar with the worker center. So a worker center, I'm highlighting an example of a worker center called NICE. It's an organization I used to work at as a community organizer. So NICE defines the worker center as a place where they connect immigrants to dignified jobs and employers to skilled workers via collective employer outreach. We're also a community space where workers gather to build community and organize. So essentially, we don't like calling it so much a job center, right? Because then there's that expectation that, workers will come and find jobs at the worker centers. What it is basically is like, it's a place where you come and like collectively organize for jobs, right? You bring employer contacts, right? And then there's somebody who can help facilitate that communication with employers, who can help make those connections, who can help speak on your behalf, where employers can go, right? And from the membership of the worker center, hire people, right? To do anything from like painting work to like pet sitting to landscaping to snow shoveling. So you see here some of the resources that are posted around NICE, basically asking employers to hire from them. It's a way to keep jobs local. It's a way to hire workers from your own community, support immigrant workers, support local economy, and it's a way for workers to stay safe, right? As a day laborer, as somebody who works, if you're a gig worker, you're somebody who doesn't have a stable job, oftentimes you'll go for the first type of employment that you'll find your way. And sometimes those employments will then be like an exploitative employment, right? They'll steal your wages, or you'll suffer some sort of negligence in that workplace, because you don't know who the employer is, because you don't know who the supervisor is, you don't know who the person's in charge. Sometimes it also doesn't leave a lot of recourse for you to do anything about that situation. So this is definitely a safe alternative for workers, and for employers as well, right? So there's something called the Immigrant Worker Bill of Rights, that is pretty new. So it is basically, so one signed by Mayor Adams, because this currently has signed, City Council has not been signed by Mayor Eric Adams yet. But one sign, the bill would require multiple city departments as well as community and labor organizations to create a workers' bill of rights that would detail rights and protections workers are guaranteed under federal, state, and local law, regardless of their immigration status. And then the hope would be that by March 2024, employers will have to display this workers' bill of rights in every workplace in New York City in a conspicuous location in the workplace. So it would so workers would have access to this, would be on view, so that there's no confusion that immigrant workers have rights in the city. Workers resource guides. So actually at NYCOSH, we publish yearly a resource booklet for workers highlighting legal services providers, health providers, workers' rights information. And this book is available in English and Spanish. It's a booklet about yay big. It's something that we give out to a lot of workers that come into our space to receive trainings. People love it. It's something that you can share with like your coworkers, something you can share with your friends, learn about your rights, learn about like what is an occupational health clinic, right? And you'll be able to navigate some of the resources from the palm of your hands through this booklet. So currently we have a 2023 version. I know the photo says 2018, but that's an old version. We do have a 2023 version that's available for download in the hyperlink on the slide. We can also make these available for physical distribution. If you all are interested, we can send some of these booklets, anywhere from like, 50 or 10 or 100 to your organization, so you all can pass around to your clients, so you all can read it and just have access to it. And we love working with new partners, with new organizations, new advocates to get this information out to workers. And that is my email. Again, I'll be passing that information at the end as well. Okay, so essential immigrant workers' rights. So I went from thinking, let's cover as many rights as we can, to being like, okay, you know what, we can't cover all immigrant workers' rights in the short amount of time that we have today. So we're just going to go over some of the essential pieces, some of the more essential issues that immigrant workers face in the workplace today. So we're going to start with employment agencies, right? So what are some of the rights that workers have when approaching employment agencies? We're going to talk about wage theft. This huge problem, huge issue, particularly within the immigrant worker community. Accidents, injuries, or death, what to do in those situations, discrimination, sexual harassment, intimidation, retaliation, and denial of paid sick and safe leave. So those are some of the issues that workers face, main issues that workers face today in the workplace. But before going into anything specifically, it's important, super important that everyone has this grounding, this base grounding, that base knowledge that every worker has rights in the workplace, regardless of immigration status or nationality. It doesn't matter whether you are a U.S. citizen, you were born in this country. It doesn't matter whether you migrated into this country 30 years ago, 30 days ago, 3 days ago, 30 hours ago, right? If you're a worker, you work in this country, you work in the city, you'll have the same rights as anyone else, regardless of your immigration status. So that's one super important piece. Employment agencies, starting with employment agencies. So I wanted to cover employment agencies because, a lot of these worker centers, worker/job centers, really rose from also the situation in which employment agencies were placing workers in, a long time ago, and still today. Employment agencies are places where a lot of like immigrant workers especially go to find employment. However, they're also a place where where a lot of workers, a lot of our community is being stolen of money, right, of their wages, where they're being placed in precarious jobs, where a lot of the agencies are, at the end of the day, they're just looking for their share, right, for their share of profits in a situation, and they often put the worker last, right, in their list, in their priorities. So just important to know that employment agencies also are enforced by the Department of Consumer Worker Protection. Employment agencies legally cannot charge you an upfront fee. So if you go into employment agencies and they say, well, I need you to pay me an application fee of $100 or a deposit fee of $200, that's illegal. That's illegal. So they can only charge you fees before they cannot charge you fees before they place you in the job. They can only charge you after you're already placed in the job. Then you also have maximum placement fee amounts. So it really depends on the type of employment. There's an employment class called A, which is domestic household employee, unskilled or untrained manual worker, labor, including agricultural worker. So this would be basically like it says, they're domestic workers. If you work in cleaning, if you work in construction, as a day laborer, so you should only pay about 10% of your first full month's wages if no meals or lodgings are provided, 12% if one meal is provided per working day, 14% if two meals are provided per working day, and 18% if three meals and lodging are provided per working day. So these are the placement fee amounts. Employment agencies legally cannot charge more than that. We know there are many employment agencies that do charge more, however, but it's important that our communities know that they have rights, and that they can come forward with complaints against employment agencies. There's also something called the Job Hunters Bill of Rights, where it covers what are your rights as a worker going into an employment agency. What are your rights? What are some things that they are required to hand you, right? Like a receipt, for example. Like you have the employment agencies have the legal obligation to provide workers with receipts of their placements. And if they don't, that can be a violation. So yes, super important. Okay, and then what is wage theft? So wage theft is, I consider it, and many advocates who work around issues of wage theft would say the same thing. It's an epidemic in our community, right? It's an epidemic in our community. We call it an epidemic because it's such an issue that workers face, particularly low-wage workers, particularly immigrant workers, particularly low-wage immigrant Latino workers are the ones that are most susceptible to being stolen of wages in the workplace in New York City and all throughout the country. And trust me, I've been in many classes and like workshop spaces where most of the classroom has experienced or knows someone who has experienced wage theft. So I invite you, if you go back to your organizations and ask your clients, ask people, like, have they experienced wage theft? I'm pretty sure they're gonna say yes, or that they know of somebody who has experienced wage theft. It's such an issue in our communities, and it's an issue that us as NYCOSH, along with other organizations, have really tried to do something about, really, by like passing legislation, by like raising awareness, organizing in the workplace against employers, against companies. But I think the more we're aware, the more workers are aware, the more community is aware, and the more as advocates we're aware of the issue, the more we can hold employers accountable to things that they do. So an estimated 2.1 million New Yorkers are victims of wage theft annually, cheated out of a cumulative $3.2 billion in wages and benefits that they are owed. Again, this is just reported These are just reported numbers. There are so many instances of wage theft that are not reported, that to probably will make this number look super small, if we're to actually count those. So what is wage theft though? Wage theft, it can happen many different ways. One of them is when an employer fails to pay you for work performed. That's a more direct form of wage theft, right? Particularly within immigrant working communities. They go to a place, let's say you recently arrived, you are looking for a job at a day labor corner, an employer picks you up, you do a day's work, 2 days work, 3 days work, and the employer says, well, I'm not going to pay you. I don't want to pay you. A lot of times workers will come to organizations, they'll ask for support, but the information that they have isn't much. They'll give me a phone number, I'll call the employer. Probably the employer changed their number already. They probably gave them a fake number. Or the employer simply says, I'm just not going to pay. You can't force me to. So, and what other recourse do we have? Because not much, because we don't have much more information. They probably don't have licenses. They probably don't have companies. They don't have insurances. So it's really difficult in those situations to go after employers when you don't have much information about them. So the suggestion always is, for workers, when they go out to the workplace, to get as much information as they can of their employers, to protect themselves. Another way wage theft is performed, most commonly, is when employers do not respect verbal agreements, right? In New York State, our verbal agreement that you have with an employer is just as valid as a written contract. Okay, so just as valid as a written contract. So if a worker agrees to being paid a wage of $18 an hour, and then the employer comes and starts paying them $15, and he's like, well, I just thought because you're just starting, so I was gonna give you less, and then maybe in 3 months I'll give you more. But that's not the deal, right? The deal was they're gonna pay you $18 an hour, so technically they are stealing your wages. When an employer fails to pay minimum wage, that's also an example. So folks who aren't familiar, so this is the minimum wage. In New York City, it's $15 an hour. For large companies and for small companies, Long Island and Westchester, the minimum wage is also $15 an hour. And for other states, and for the rest of New York State, it's $14.20. Tip workers. So there's different classifications of tip workers. There's service employees, food service employees, and miscellaneous service industries. And I've also put some examples there of the industries of workers, right? In these industries. So there's something called a cash wage. There's something called a tip credit. Essentially, your employer must be responsible that your wages include tip credit, the minimum tip credit, which is for a service employee, would be $2.50 per hour. If you're not receiving that tip credit through tips, right, from clients, then they need to then the employer needs to cover that difference, and guarantee essentially that you're making a minimum of $15 an hour in a workplace. So essentially with all this, what needs to be known is that New York City right now, currently as we stand, New York City, like no worker should be making less than $15 an hour, whether or not you're a tipped worker or not. Overtime is also another way in which employers often steal wages. When does overtime apply? It'll apply after 40 hours a week. Again, OT will only count after 40 hours a week, not after 8 hours a day. So this is often common misconception, right? Workers will often think that, if you work after 8 hours in the day, you're entitled to overtime. That's not true. It will only count if you work more than 40 hours in a week. The pay rate of overtime is time and a half. So for example, if you're making a wage of $15 an hour, you add half of that minimum wage, you add half of that wage, and you get $22.50 an hour. So you should be making about $22.50 an hour after 40 hours. And oftentimes, right, an employer will sometimes come to a worker, an immigrant worker, right, and will say, hey, like, can you come on the weekend? But don't worry, I'm going to pay you in cash, pay you off the books, like a regular day. Like you won't have to worry about reporting or anything, etc. So a lot of workers, they see this as like a favor that employers are doing, right? But in reality, that you're doing them a favor because you're not charging them the $22.50 an hour that they need to be paying you, because they're saying they're going to pay you in cash and off the books, etc. So that's important for workers to know. And then there's exists other forms of wage theft, right? So what other forms of wage theft exist, right? If you have any questions, you can put them in the comments. We can also talk afterwards. There's many instances of sometimes. So a lot of times I will tell workers, right? Maybe you don't know if you're being stolen the wages. You can reach out to me, just like ask me a question, shoot me a text, be like, hey, this is happening. Is this person stealing my wages, right? Or send me a voice message, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can, and tell you yes or no. And then we can take it from there. So beyond wage theft, we also have, beyond wages, we also have the right to a safe and healthy workplace. So we talked a little bit about OSHA requirements, right? What is we talked about OSHA 30, all these OSHA requirements that are needed for construction workers, particularly in New York City. But what is OSHA, right? What is OSHA? What are these protections that workers have? Again, these protections under OSHA are extended to all workers around the country. And it doesn't matter your immigration status. Your immigration status does not matter at all. So what is OSHA? So OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. It was passed to prevent workers from being killed or seriously harmed at work. The law requires employers to provide their employees with working conditions that are free of known dangers. So there's something called, so there's different types of hazards, right? If you were to take an OSHA course, you would understand what these hazards are. Hazards are in the workplaces, like something like biological hazards, physical hazards, chemical hazards. What do those hazards look like? There's also something called a hierarchy of controls. It's how do you control those hazards? How do you mitigate those hazards in the workplace? How do you work together with your employer? Right. So this is all information that is offered in the OSHA courses. And supposed to and it really does provide a lot of information to workers and empowers them to like speak up in their workplaces. The act created the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, which sets and enforces workplace standards and health rules of standards. Workers may file a complaint to OSHA to have OSHA inspect their workplace if they believe that their employer is not following OSHA standards or that there are serious hazards. So once again, there's a hyperlink on the right side of the page. Know more about your OSHA rights. And yeah, like I said, you can contact us as well. We do these courses all the time. So another issue that workers face a lot in the workplace is discrimination in the workplace. Under New York State and New York City human rights law, it is illegal for an employer to discriminate you or fire you based on age, race, religion, color, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, or disability in the terms and conditions of your employment. I will also add that in New York City, it is illegal to discriminate workers based on immigration status, right? That's a newer condition that was passed a couple of years ago. So employers cannot discriminate workers based on their status. So, we've had instances, for example, where in a workplace, workers will have the undocumented workers working, and a certain section of the workplace, and then you'll have like the U.S. citizens working in the other section, right? Or you'll discriminate based on like religion. So all of that's illegal. And if you were to report that, workplaces, employers can be fined heavily, and you would be also eligible to receive compensation for it. So paid safe and sick leave. Under the Safe and Sick Leave Act, workers can earn 1 hour of sick time for every 30 hours that they work, accumulating up to 40 hours per year. So it's important to know that, while everyone has access and everyone has a right to access sick time, there are situations in which it is not paid. The sick time is not paid. It's not paid if there are less than 5 employees in a certain location. So if your workplace only employs 2 people, 3 people, it's a small workplace. They can't pay you, right? I mean, they can if they really wanted to, but they don't necessarily. There's no legal obligation to pay you. But it does need to be paid if there are 5 or more employees in the workplace. It's important to know you're allowed to take off hours of work, not just days. So there are many situations where, that workers have come to me saying that their employers, that they're trying to take, a couple of hours in the morning off because they have a doctor's appointment with their kids. And the employer says, well, you're just gonna have to take the whole day off. So that's not right. Legally, you're allowed to take off hours. You can take 2-3 hours off, and it's totally okay. And beyond that, you should have access to a time off balances worksheet, like you see down here, where you're able to view like the accrued time, the time that you have accrued, time that you have taken, and time that you have remaining. And employers must provide this with you with every pay stub. Must provide this information to you with every pay stub. And if you don't receive pay stubs, if workers don't receive pay stubs, they have the right to ask employers for this information, and employers legally need to hand this information over. They cannot contain this information like to themselves. The accrual of paid safe and sick leave starts after you work with an employer for more than 80 hours in a year. So if you're a full-time worker, it's about 2 weeks, right? This is also going to apply if you need to take care of a family member. So if you need to take care of a family member, need to take them to the doctor, need to, stay at home because family member's sick, your kids, your parents, you can take time off for that as well. Okay. And yeah, so important to know that, in these situations, right, there are many situations in which, an employee will be, they see that their situation at work isn't good, right? They're not getting the paid sick time, that they deserve. They don't feel like the employer is watching for their health and safety in the workplace. They're putting them at risk. They're maybe stealing some wages here and there. So you want to do something, right? And, workers want to do something. Workers want to speak up, because we're telling them speak up, so you want to speak up. There's different ways to speaking up, right? One would be like obviously talking to an employer, talking to a supervisor about it. And then there's something called concerted action. So concerted action is known as concerted action when 2 or more workers act together to improve their wages and or working conditions. So under concerted action, the concerted action is a protected action under the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, on the federal level. So if 2 or more workers act together, employers cannot retaliate. They cannot fire a worker. They cannot treat them unjustly. They cannot reposition them in the workplace. they cannot do those things if two or more workers act together. So I always tell workers, you have more protections. Your case is stronger when more than one of you acts in benefit of your workplace. So what are some examples of concerted action? It's when two or more employees address their employer about improving their salaries, when two or more employees discuss worker-related issues beyond pay, such as health and safety issues, an employee speaking to an employer on behalf of one or more coworkers about improving conditions in the workplace. So again, retaliation is prohibited when acting between two or more people. It's a protected action on a federal level. There are also other protections, right? Whistleblower protections under OSHA, under Department of Labor, right? So if you suffer retaliation, right? If a worker suffers retaliation under an employer, which is very common, especially amongst immigrant workers, there often will be some sort of protection under the enforcement agencies. However, I will say they are difficult to justify. They are difficult to prove. It is a long process, but it is important. Like beyond, the legal protections that you're given when you act collectively. Collectivity also offers a sort of protection amongst each other as coworkers, right? I feel backed up if my coworker comes with me and talks to my employer. It's a sort of validation. It's a sort of power, right? That we can exercise, and we have the right to exercise in our workplaces. Okay, so how can immigrants approach a workplace problem? Sorry, the title's very off. How can you immigrants approach a workplace problem? So oftentimes, I will suggest, and as many agencies will suggest, first talk to your employer or supervisor, right? If you think your wages are being stolen, if workers feel like they aren't getting paid the minimum wage, if workers feel like, there's a condition at work, right? There's like a danger, a hazard at work in a workplace. Talk to your employer first. Talk to your employer or supervisor, bring it up, because that's going to show kind of that good faith on your part to resolve the situation. If that situation isn't resolved, I would suggest personally contact your local worker center. So it's basically the organizations I have highlighted previously. There are different worker centers throughout the city. I would suggest contacting one of them, because worker centers often are, very well versed when it comes to like, workplace issues, especially with amongst immigrant workers. They're very well versed into like the dangers of these issues, also well versed into like what potential solutions there can be, right? In some situations in worker centers, like I have, in the past, called employers directly, been like, hey, like, there is this workplace situation, and under OSHA, under Department of Labor, under DC, under Department of Consumer Worker Protection, you cannot do so and so, right? You cannot perform in so and so way, right? So while we're not filing complaints with these agencies, it's often the threat of filing the complaint that sometimes get people moving, right? Gets employers moving, gets them acting correctly, which is what we want, right? That's what we want in the immediacy. And it also shows that workers, right, like that we have the workers back, right? So, while the employer may see the worker as like, someone who's causing trouble, like, can you really do something? Like, it'll make basically employers think twice before like retaliating against the worker, knowing that worker also belongs to a larger network of workers and worker centers in the city. File a complaint with your local and state agencies. Of course, that's always an option. You can call your local state agency directly. But I will say there are dozens of local state agencies that sometimes it's difficult to navigate, to know where to go for certain issues, right? If it's a discrimination case, like you're gonna go to the Commission of Human Rights. If it's paid safe and sick leave issue, you're gonna go to Consumer Worker Protection, employment agencies, also to Consumer Worker Protection, health and safety with OSHA. So there's different agencies that correspond to the different violations and different enforcements in that workplace. So again, I do think worker centers are well versed in this. And if you don't want to reach out to a worker center, reach out to NYCOSH, right? You can feel free to send me a message, and if you want to go straight to an agency, most often we'll have a contact in those agencies to help those workers out. Okay, and then lastly, I want to talk about these new programs, new protections for immigrant workers. One called Deferred Action for Workers in Labor Disputes. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this, but this past year, in January 2023, the DHS, also known as Department of Homeland Security, announced a streamlined and expedited deferred action request process for non-citizen workers who experience or witness labor rights violations. So, so I'll keep reading first. The purpose of this process, also known as DALE, that was the name of the campaign, DALE, is to promote fairness, safety, and a level playing field for all workers in the U.S. by strengthening labor agencies' ability to enforce labor and employment standards. So deferred action, right? This is deferred action for non-citizen workers. Not sure how much folks are familiar with, for example, with DACA, right? So DACA was protection for young immigrants who came here as children, right? What DACA provides is a deferred action. It's work permits, 2-year work permits that are renewable every 2 years. What basically this is similar, right? But this is for immigrant workers who are non-citizens who have experienced or have been witness to labor rights violations in their workplace. So, for example, if you have an open wage theft case, right, with the Department of Labor, you can request a letter of support from the Department of Labor so that they can send over to Department of Homeland Security, to immigration, essentially, recommending that they provide you a work permit. So because you need to stay here in this country while they have an open investigation against your employer. This is something completely new. It's something that's also like super beneficial to a lot of workers. This is a way for workers to feel safe coming out of the shadows, feel safe in filing complaints against their employers. And there's currently a tour going on to inform workers about the DALE campaign, let them know if they're dealing with wage theft, work harassment on the job, that they can be protected from deportations and be granted work permits for reporting these violations. So, and this is with NDLON, the National Day Labor Organizing Networks. They were the coordinators of this campaign nationwide, advocating for this law to pass. Well, not this law, but this memorandum, should I say. And it finally passed this year. And, a lot of advocates have been like stepping up and like really trying to streamline this process as best they can to support immigrant workers who've been victims of labor violations and getting them those like protections that they need while investigations are ongoing. So again, there's a hyperlink on this page for more information about the program. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. This is my email as well as my work number. I'll put the little WhatsApp logo there because that's usually how I interact with workers and people in general. So feel free to message me. And yeah, I will pass it now to, actually, we're going to open for Q&A right now, right? So let's do the Q&A. let's see. I'm gonna try to navigate this.
I have the Q&A right here. So there's somebody who posted a question here. So a participant asks, the OSHA Spanish classes at your organization, are they free? How do we make a referral?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the OSHA classes at NYCOSH, they're completely free. We offer OSHA classes for immigrant workers like once a month. Oh no, sorry, twice a month. Um, so yeah, if you want to refer folks, feel free to message me, shoot me an email. I can connect you to our trainers, who are the people who do the registration as well. Um, and yeah, so there's a certain process, right? But if you reach out to me, I can send you that information.
Thank you so much. For folks who have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. You can also use the Q&A section. You can drop any questions in the chat if that's what you feel comfortable with. Cindy asks, are there any resources for people to get their CDL?
And can you remind me what CDL is again? What refers to? Someone?
Someone said truck license.
Okay. So for licenses, I don't know about commercial driver's license, but I do know that immigrant workers have the ability to get driver's license. Like undocumented immigrant workers are eligible to get driver's licenses now in New York State. There are certain requirements. I would definitely suggest checking out the DMV's website for those requirements. I think you just need like your passport, an updated passport, your country. Consular ID is also good as long as it's up to date. And yeah, there's some other things there that you may need to show a history of certain things. But I'm not sure exactly if it translates into commercial driver's license. But yeah, check that out.
Ryan mentioned, we work on partnership with DYCD offering employment opportunities to younger and older youth. And we are curious at Beam Center of what resources exist for youth on Know Your Rights.
Yeah, good question. Actually, we do in NYCOSH, we do young workers health and safety trainings, particularly for young workers. Yeah, we'd be happy to if you want to reach out to us, we can set that up. But there are, we cater to young workers because there are extra protections for young workers in terms of like, if you're of a certain age, employers can't require you to perform certain tasks, right? So for example, if you're 16 years old, an employer can't require you to operate heavy machinery. But that's something that only applies to young workers. And yeah, we do trainings for young workers all the time. So feel free to reach out if that's something that you're interested in.
Participant asked, what type of protections exist, or what advice do you have for undocumented workers who are experiencing workplace violations, but don't want to speak out due to fear of deportation? The Dale campaign seems to solve this problem in part. So how exactly can workers utilize this program?
Great. Really good question. So fear of retaliation, fear of deportation is the biggest fear that workers face in the workplace. And it's like you mentioned, it's something that Dale, in this case, that's fairly new. It's very new, is trying to address, right? I think it's important to get the word out, right, of these protections, because I think a lot of people do not, a lot of people don't know about these protections, right? Don't know about these resources. What would be helpful to access these protections is by speaking to attorneys, speaking to an employment law attorney, speaking to an immigration attorney, finding an attorney and community-friendly immigrant, community-friendly attorney that will understand these dynamics, because not all wage and hour attorneys will understand. So, like I said, on that slide, on the slide that presented with Dale, there is, let me pull it up. There is more information here on how to access these how to access this protection. There's also a toolkit as well. There's around here. There's also a toolkit that you can have access to that really details, you know, how you can start the process. So yeah, I recommend, you know, checking it out, going to NILC, going to Endalon's website, and speaking to attorneys about this and the options. So I will say, like, yes, this is something that's like promising, but I will say also that workers need to be involved throughout the process, because it does involve reaching out to immigration, it does involve immigration, and it is these decisions to give workers deferred action are at the discretion of immigration officers. So, like, it's not a guarantee, right, that you're going to get the deferred action. If you have a history with immigration, there are certain risks that you could be taking. So, all of these risks, all these factors need to be kept in mind. That's why I suggest getting an attorney.
And a related question, someone asked, what language is the toolkit provided in?
The toolkit, the toolkit, the Dale toolkit, I believe it's in English and Spanish, if I'm not mistaken. I can double check. There's definitely in English. I will actually post the toolkit on the chat. It's very extensive. It's right there in the chat.
We have a few other questions here.
Yeah.
Do people need appointments to the worker centers, or can they just show up to these organizations in order to get assistance?
Oftentimes the worker centers, and I speak from my experience working at NICE. I can't speak from like other worker centers directly. So NICE, which is a worker center in Queens, in Jackson Heights, that I understand, and I don't know if this is still the process. I think there's folks from NICE on this call, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I believe it's mostly walk-in. Workers can walk in. If you're seeking a specific service, right? Like you have a wage staff case, or you know, you need some like one-on-one support with something, maybe then you can call ahead. But I think most of the time you can just walk in and speak to someone.
Our next question is, can NYCOSH guide immigrants to obtain vendor's licenses? And the example they provided is sell clothes.
Ooh, good question. We do not do that. We do not do that, but there is an organization that I will suggest called the Street Vendors Project. It's actually down the block from where we're at. And perhaps they can help you with that. All right, let's put it in the chat as well.
The next question is, can you talk a little bit more about your nail salon certification program?
Sure, I can talk to the extent that I know. So I'm not one of the trainers or coordinators there, but I do work, you know, with them often. So the nail salon program, you know, basically there's a 26-hour course, a 36-hour course that nail salon workers need to go through in order to get their certifications. However, in order to go through this program, you do need to have experience or be working currently in a nail salon. So that's definitely an important point. So workers who are interested in these certifications need to have some experience and need to have been working at a nail salon. Yeah, so we do the certifications, we do the health and safety pieces, we do know your rights. We also do a lot of work on the advocacy side with the state. We're trying to pass. There's currently this kind of legislation basically to improve the working conditions of nail salon workers and improve the quality of work in the sector. It's called the Healthy Nail Salon Act. I could put more information from the nail salon work in the website on the chat as well. But again, feel free to reach out. I can connect you to the people who are in charge.
Somebody posted in the chat, NICE is great for Spanish-speaking communities. Do you know of other service providers similar to NICE that can help with Creole, Bengali, and Mandarin in Brooklyn, New York?
Good question. So from Bengali, I would recommend another organization called Drum. Desi's Rising Up and Moving. They're a great organization / worker center based out of Queens. And I do think that they do some work in Brooklyn as well. Creole and Mandarin, I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. I kind of want to say a couple of organizations, but I can't like guarantee. I don't want to put names out there that I'm just brainstorming in my head. But if you reach out, if you email me, I can figure that out for you. Yeah, and maybe it won't be specifically Brooklyn, unfortunately, but maybe in other parts of the city. But those supports usually do exist in different languages.
The next question here is, food pantry access is great, but what are families to do if the hotel or shelter facilities that are placed in do not permit cooking in their rooms? Typically, food offerings have not been culturally sensitive.
Yes. I really don't know what to say about that. That's something that I've also heard, a lot of immigrant communities talk about, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an irony of of city resources and services. I guess, yeah.
The next question is, are there resources anywhere for Russian, Arabic, French speakers?
So yeah, like I said, if you reach out, I can connect you to some organizations, resources. So for example, Arabic, and French, we've actually had a lot of an influx of immigrant population seeking courses, OSHA courses, for example, in Arabic and French. We are reaching out to trainers there's a database of trainers in New York State and all over the country that do OSHA courses, 30-hour courses in these different languages. We have identified 1 or 2 trainers in Arabic in the tri-state area. So we're trying to do that work so that, for immigrants as well, for immigrant workers, but nothing has panned out quite yet. So if it's about, trainings like the OSHA training, like feel free to reach out. And also with regard to any other resources, I think I can help navigate something if you reach out directly.
Cindy asks, do you provide any civic engagement workshop to help people learn about how to bring change to immigrations?
Good question. We do not. We do not have civic engagement courses. I think the civic engagement work that we do perhaps is embedded in other areas of work that we do. So when we talk about like our campaigns, like legislative campaigns or organizing in our communities, civic engagement is often the piece that's tied into it, but we don't do just, only civic engagement. The NYIC, I'm pretty sure a lot of folks are familiar. New York Immigration Coalition has a network also of organizations that support immigrant communities. And I know civic engagement is a big piece of the work that NYIC supports. So I would look at them for perhaps some guidance on that.
Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you so much, Charlie. We definitely want to take this time to for folks to fill out a feedback survey, and I'm going to post it right on the chat. So if you have any other questions, if you have any feedback for this webinar, please fill out the survey. It should take no more than 5 minutes. It's anonymous. If there is other topics that you're interested in learning more about, please include it in the survey. We definitely want to provide offerings that meets the community, the needs of the communities that you're serving. Also, if there are other questions that you have, aside from putting in the feedback survey, you still have the chance to put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A, or raise your hand, and you can definitely ask. But just taking this time for folks to fill out this feedback survey.